Let's Go Green, sponsored by EirGrid, managing and operating Ireland's electricity grid for a cleaner energy future. Check out airgrid.ie for more.
Very welcome to this week's edition of Let's Go Green here on Midlands 103. I hope you're safe and well as you tune in, and my thanks to Zoe Ryan, who stood in for me over the last couple of weeks while I had to take a little bit of leave. Now, on this week's show, we're going to be talking about why we shouldn't be feeding the birds this summer. We're going to learn a little bit more about that from Niall Hatch. We're also going to be talking to us about our energy security, and we will be joined by security analyst Declan Power. But first things first, with the level of global conflict, I think is the best way to summarise it, ongoing around the world at the moment, nuclear power has come back into the conversation in mainstream media. It's even made, the floors of the Dáil. And it's something that perhaps we hadn't been talking about here on the show, but here in Ireland in terms of making us more sustainable in how we are creating energy here on the island of Ireland. And to talk to us a little bit more about this, we're joined by John Sweeney, who is, of course, Professor Emeritus of Maynooth University. John, you are very welcome to the show.
Hi, Aisling.
John, nuclear power, it brings nightmares for a lot of people. And then at the same time, we're conscious of the fact that with the interconnector, we're importing nuclear power. So it can be a really confusing topic for listeners.
It can indeed. And for a climate scientist, it's particularly heartrending because on the one hand, we see nuclear power as a bit of a risk. But on the other hand, we see climate change as a bit of a risk also. And we wonder, can we do anything in the short term, or is nuclear power something that really is just buying us time? I think the debate that you mentioned has recently restarted in Ireland, and the Taoiseach, I think, said it was something that should be discussed. I think it was either earlier this week or last week, but I think it's not clear whether he was prompted by the question to say it or whether he just brought it up himself. But I think it's quite clear that there are rumblings happening in the Dáil about this topic. And of course, it represents a sea change from where we have been for the past decade or so, where we didn't even talk about this topic at all. It's not something which was in the programme for government, so it has emerged very quickly. And probably, as you say, been accelerated by the events in the Middle East. Now, nuclear power is something that divides people, and I'm certainly divided myself. I grew up next to a nuclear power station, 20 kilometres away or so from one, and it didn't seem to bother me at the time. And then when I came to Maynooth, one of the first few years there, Chernobyl happened, and I started modelling Chernobyl with my students and looking at how it would be dispersed, how the plume would go. And I assured them that the wind was from the west, it would all go towards the east. We needn't worry about anything. And then, lo and behold, it all did go to the east, and then it turned round and came back and bit us on the as it came back over Europe again, and resulted in, for example, an inability to eat meat from sheep and all sorts of restrictions in the uplands of even Northern Ireland for, I think, about nearly 20 years or so after that. So we're taking decisions which have consequences far into the future. And with nuclear, I suppose there are concerns, firstly, about whether or not we are simply swapping one form of energy security based on oil from imported oil for another form of energy security based on imported uranium. Or do we envisage uranium mines in Ireland as well, which I don't think we can envisage. So we have that, and we have the risk then of the disposal of waste, which has not been solved in all the years we've had nuclear power. We know that small modular reactors, which are the forms now being touted, they produce as much, if not more, nuclear waste than the light water reactors of the past. So that's a problem for the next generation and for probably 100 generations after that in terms of living with the consequences of a decision we make now. On the positive side, nuclear power provides baseload energy, baseload electricity, dispatchable, irrespective of what the wind or what the waves are doing, or what the sun is doing. So it overcomes that problem of intermittency that we will have with renewable energy. But renewable energy, if we can get it up to 80 or 90%, offers us opportunities of combining with the very big advances in battery technology, which is now occurring, and enabling us to overcome a lot of those intermittency problems in the future. So the jury is out in many ways. There are pros and cons of each. And I think, in terms of from a climate perspective, we don't have 20 years to dabble with this issue. And the average nuclear reactor is now taking up to 20 years to go from design to operation. Some of them in Finland, for example, have been cancelled well into that process because the delays were just so unbelievably long. And we in Ireland don't have a great record in providing and building infrastructure. So, one wonders, can we really afford to wait till the end of the 2040s for this solution to come along?
And that's the thing, really, isn't it? Like, these modular nuclear reactors, they're really, in the scheme of things, being tested at present. They're generating, as you say, far more waste. They're based on the planning system that we currently have. We can envisage, if someone were to decide that they wanted to build a nuclear reactor at, I don't know, Derryclore in Tullamore, that not only would there be an objection to the facility and the infrastructure itself, but then wherever that waste was going to be disposed of, there would be more planning objections for that, because that would be a separate site, perhaps. Like, we can't even, let's be honest about it, we can't even build a metro or a children's hospital in this country without taking decades. So I suppose the skeptic in me finds it really hard to believe that we could get one of these, just one, up and running as quickly as we need to tackle climate change.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And in fact, we don't even have one SMR up and running in the world at the moment. We have, I think, a version of one in a Russian submarine anchored somewhere off the Murmansk area, a nuclear submarine. We have some which have been supposed to come on stream in North America in 2025, but has still not materialized. And the bottom line is that there are about 30 different designs for SMRs around at the moment. And really, they're a technology which has not yet been proven. We don't know if there will be sort of unforeseen problems or hitches with this new technology down the road. And that's why I think it's very important to be extremely cautious about putting our eggs in this basket until we're very sure. You're right about the waste. You're right about the problems of delay. But SMRs, would you want one in your backyard? Would you want one in Tullamore? Would you want one in Mullingar? Because that's the reality of small modular reactors. They are multiples which have to occur in small towns. Now, there are safety issues, obviously. There are terrorism issues as well, which we have to face up to. I mean, there was a nuclear plant in South Africa, which a guy went in and strapped a bomb to. There can be security failings. We know that. And we know that the designs which we are told were foolproof didn't really work in Chernobyl's case either. And that was in 1986. And here we are 40 years later with children still suffering the ill effects of that one event. So I think, we really should think twice. When we have a proven technology of offshore wind, when we have a proven technology of solar, when we have developing rapidly technologies of battery storage of various kinds, some really exciting forms of storage in stone and salt and in electronics versions. And that to me is the more secure option for the immediate future, because from a climate point of view, you can't wait until 2050 to know if this thing is going to solve our problems. And I don't really think, therefore, that we should use it as a distraction to actually getting to grips with the real problems we have of climate change at the moment. We can solve that energy component from existing technology if we have the will and the political mojo to do it. And that's what's lacking.
There's been so much media coverage, political coverage, even, in the local pub chatting about it, around wind energy in this country. But we don't talk about, say, hydrogen power or geothermal energy and these other areas that perhaps we could or maybe even should be investigating and investing in. Is there a concern, like you say, that if we get very excited in the media talking about nuclear this week and for the next couple of weeks and months, that, as you say, it's a distraction from actually getting other options up and running that we know are proven, that we know are safe?
Yeah, it is. And certainly hydrogen is one, and things like ammonia are fuels that can be used to replace a lot of our existing fuels for transport, for example. I don't see hydrogen being piped into our homes very quickly without a lot of more safety considerations being associated with it. But yes, we have geothermal power. We have possibilities of tapping into the heat underground in Ireland that we haven't really explored in the depths that we should. I'm always reminded of the number of hot springs we have around Ireland, and many of our parents and grandparents were conscious of where the hot springs were in the middle of winter that didn't freeze over. And there are things like that where heat exchangers could make a very big difference to local communities and even provide district heating in many cases as well. So I think that there is a distraction here, and there's a tendency to go with the glossy technology, even though it's not yet proven, as opposed to the tried and trusted methods that we know exist and could be developed further, and would provide us with the energy independence and energy sovereignty in Ireland, which is so important, because we can't really be reliant on outside powers anymore for our fossil fuels. We know that. And indeed, even for uranium, we don't know where that's going to come from. And it could be the oil of the 22nd century, for all we know, which would be used to ransom demands from smaller countries like Ireland. So I'm a bit wary of going down that road, certainly.
Given we've been having these conversations like this, John, now for a couple of years, and you've been around for much longer than that and studying this area, how are we now doing in Ireland? Because there was so much objection, like when just transition first became a phrase in our dialect, when we started talking about wind turbines on the island. Like there has been progress. I know not as much as we want, but where do things stand as far as you're concerned from that scientific perspective?
Well, from a scientific perspective, the message is exactly the same. The problem is that the message maybe has not got through to the public, and I blame people like myself as much as anything else for that. We're not communicating the message as effectively. And I think one of the things I noticed last month was that there was a very influential report from the World Meteorological Organization of what had happened last year in the world, a whole series of climate-related catastrophes. And it was number one on the RTE website when I got up in the morning. By lunchtime, it was about 10th or 11th on the website, which is indicating nobody was really watching it. Nobody was really interested. And I think that's the general symptom that we see at the moment, that the public feel there are other priorities, and that, this is something, we can think about that down the road. But when you ask somebody, well, what matters to you? and they say, oh, it matters if I can grow my food. It matters if my children and grandchildren are going to be looked after. It matters if my house is going to be safe and warm and avoiding hazards in the years ahead. And then you say, well, but all of them are connected to climate and climate change. Why are you not therefore out agitating on these matters? So just transition is part and parcel of that as well. But it's the mechanism whereby we get a transition for people which is fair and which is equitable, but which recognises that their concerns ultimately boil down to climate and climate-related issues. And that's something that I think we have to be more effective in communicating to the public. I think we have failed as scientists to do that very well in the past, and I think we have to think of new ways, new narratives, new appeals to the psychology of people, which will get this important message across more effectively than dull scientists like myself can manage.
Dull, never, John. That is not a word I would use to describe you. I thoroughly enjoy our conversations and appreciate your time and expertise. Well, John Sweeney, climate scientist, thank you so much for joining us once again on Let's Go Green.
You're welcome.
We'll be back after the break.
Let's Go Green, sponsored by EirGrid, managing and operating Ireland's electricity grid for a cleaner energy future. Check out airgrid.ie for more.
You're listening to Let's Go Green here on Midlands 103, and I'm delighted now to be joined by security and defence analyst Declan Power. Declan, you are very welcome to Let's Go Green.
Thank you, Aisling. Nice to be here.
Now, Declan, before the break, we were speaking with Professor John Sweeney, and he mentioned this term of energy sovereignty. And of course, in this country, we import so much of what we need, and there is security concerns that we should be taking into consideration when we're looking to maybe develop renewable resources and become a little bit less reliant on fossil fuels. And I suppose when we talk about security and defence, sometimes people in Ireland, well, we don't really like to talk about it, so we tend not to take it all that seriously. We kind of guffaw at it. But how seriously should we be looking at security around our energy infrastructure?
Well, the energy aspect of security is what has galvanised both government attention and I would even say public sentiment in the last year or more, particularly since the war in Ukraine. So security and defence is not the elephant in the room that it used to be in Ireland, but it's still, there's a long way to go yet. It was so far down list of priorities and list of comprehension in Irish society that we're still struggling to get our heads around it as a society. So I think the issue of energy and to a lesser extent food security, particularly energy, but shall we say subsurface assets, so things around within our waters and within waters we're responsible for, such as energy interconnectors and of course the famed internet cables, which is what most people would have heard about. That is what has galvanized the attention, that we have things that we need to mind. It has also started to waken us up to the fact that we are interdependent. Other nations depend on us and we depend on other nations. Your previous speaker talks about energy sovereignty, and he's right. Ireland is very much in the bottom pile of those that concept. Mind you, most countries are, and we saw that in after the invasion of Ukraine and when Russia started messing around with the energy. As Warren Buffett would put it, you saw who was swimming without trunks when the tide came in. Germany was one who was very exposed. They had left themselves far too reliant on a country like Russia, which, to be honest, people who stood in my space had been scratching their heads about that for years. Ireland, on a positive note, a few positive notes, Ireland is fortunate. Most of our 80% of our energy needs are met through an interconnector from Scotland, which means most of our energy is coming from either the UK or from Norway via the UK. So they're two dependable partner allied nations. We have a lot in common. Norway isn't in the EU, but it's very close to the EU. It cooperates a lot. It's a country we're familiar with from a variety of different demarches. Some of your listeners will know that Norway, despite being a leading member of NATO and a very heavily armed nation, is also hugely respected in the third world as a peace broker and as a supporter to third world countries trying to manage their own energy assets, newly emerging countries such as South Sudan and places like that. So, and the UK, despite all the bitching and moaning we might do, they are family. We have shared interests, values. We always will have. Geography matters. What has changed, though, is that Ireland has realised that we can't expect those countries to be the ones to secure the energy assets completely. The UK is very stretched militarily. It's still a big military power. Obviously, it's always going to be much bigger than us. But in its category, it is struggling. In our category, which is a category all of its own, we hadn't even gotten to the point where we could struggle, if you know what I mean, with regards to securing these areas. So a few additional positive things are that we realise we have to share responsibility for these interconnectors and cables. We're in a procurement process with the French at the moment with regards to a variety of things, including new primary grade radar for air surveillance, sonar for our Navy. What it means, though, is that we will start to, and we should have been doing this a long time ago, beefing up our air and naval assets, not just concentrating on the army. The army is important, but for home defence, air and naval is important too. They're all important in their own way.
But what about how this energy gets to the island of Ireland? Is that a weak link? Because it could be perhaps tapped into en route to us by other forces that, well, they might not have anything against us, but it's an easy way to get access to European resources or even just to annoy certain countries and nation states.
I think we have to realise that they would want to annoy us because we're a leading member of the European Union. You know, whatever way you want. I mean, Ireland still talks about military neutrality and whatever else, but I think any reasoned person at this stage of the game has to have figured out that being part of a bloc like the European Union doesn't mean you're purely neutral anymore. You can't say, well, it's nothing to do with us. We're part of that bloc. We're imposing sanctions on Russia. We're supporting Ukraine. We're actually supporting Ukraine militarily, just not with direct offensive weapons, but we're supplying them with a lot of other things, including finance. So that does make us not a direct target. We're not top of the list, but would somebody want to irritate us? Because irritating us can irritate others. You know, that's the thing that people have to understand. So to come back to your point about securing, I would say the first step in security is understanding the threat landscape and understanding that we have things and do things that put us at risk. And where we are most at risk is with regards to our energy needs, I would argue. So Gas Networks Ireland, who have the primary responsibility for looking after these interconnectors, have told me in work that I did for them some time ago that 80% of the country's energy needs are met through the interconnector that comes down from Scotland via the Isle, in close to the Isle of Man and into Ireland, down south of Dublin somewhere. And if that was ruptured in a serious way, that could take 6 months to fix. And that would leave Ireland with, what was the phrase they used, brown and dark outages, meaning that in some cases you might have complete outages in parts of the country for periods. And we saw, if you want a template, look at the Storm Éowyn and how that happened,
the struggle that caused.
Yes, exactly. And that was just a region. It was on a regional basis. The brown outages refer to where you have rolling, you have electricity here for a period, then they stop it because they have to concentrate in another part of the country or different times of the day. So households might go without electricity in order for essential workplaces to have electricity. It would be like something out of World War II era. It'd be nothing that today's population would have experienced. And there is the question then, in terms of defence, it's not just the kinetic side of things, the things that go boom. It's about developing resilience in a society. And I would argue that Ireland has the capability to be resilient. We saw that during the pandemic. But we don't have the structures in place and the actual training process like they do in Nordic countries to develop what would be a spirit of resiliency as well as structures. And we saw how easy it is for malign influences, like the toxicity that came out during the let's call them the agri protests, where you had trucks and tractors preventing movement, to the point that we nearly stopped our essential services because of blockages on refineries. So people can get very irate when they're stirred up, usually through online messaging, coupled then with unintended, unheeded
because it's tapping into that sense of anger and desperation that's already there, and it's just tipping people over the edge and doing things that they might not otherwise do. So, like,
and not see the damage. Like the people that set out in those to blockade those refineries were convinced they had to do that for the greater good. They couldn't see that they were going to do serious damage, especially to the more vulnerable in our society. So that's one whole thing that we don't really think that much about with regards to defence in Ireland, and it's hugely important. The other side to it is with regards to the physical security of the interconnectors, for example. Well, GNI, Gas Networks Ireland, and others are able to, they have sensors on them. The sensors will indicate if there's any attempt to tamper. But what you don't want really is if somebody's tampering with them with nefarious intent, you know, as the French might put it, the merd has really hit the fan then. You want to try and get to a situation where they don't get to do that. And that's where the naval patrolling is important, and the sonar, and the monitoring. Now, so we've seen Russian submarines routinely come in and out of the Irish Sea. They're not really the problem here. They're more of a problem if the Cold War between Europe and Russia, the hybrid war, was to turn hot. It's those, the shadow fleet vessels. Some of them are just carrying oil illegally. Some of them are acting as surveillance and spy ships. The Yantar, for example, is widely known in European security circles to do that. The Russian ship, the Yantar. And this is why their activities and monitoring them are so important. And if needs be, boarding them is so important. To prevent them from, they probably have at this stage mapped out where all of the cables are, but to prevent them from being able to sabotage them. Now, to sabotage them, it doesn't require a sophisticated Spetsnaz team, Spetsnaz being the Russian special forces, of frogmen to get down with the explosives, which was sort of what was done with the Nord Stream pipeline earlier on in the Ukraine war. But in this case, you could have, and this happened in the Baltic, I forget, with one of the Baltic states interconnectors, where an anchor was dragged across it and it was damaged.
And now, something as simple as that can do serious damage.
So therefore, to prevent against this doesn't require, it requires an investment in technology. It requires, most importantly, two things, I would argue. An investment in manpower, the necessary maritime manpower, the naval personnel and vessels, which we're low on, but it's not beyond the realm of possibility to improve that without a huge cost.
Okay. And
cooperation and schemes of cooperation, mechanisms. So on that note, two positive things have happened. We have upgraded our Memorandum of Understanding on Defence with the UK. We will probably engage in joint procurement with them for equipment we need, which means they know more about how to procure stuff and get good value for it. We don't, I can assure you of that, no matter what the Department of Defence said. We just don't have the experience of it. And that saves money, it gets the right equipment. We're doing it with the French as well. But also we're going to do joint patrolling, not so much in Irish territorial waters, but in the EEZ waters that we control, because they're so big. Even if we double the size of our naval service, we still wouldn't be able to patrol them efficiently. So having a joint approach, putting liaison officers on each other's ships, sharing intelligence, and crucially, something else that I didn't think we would, but it was announced with the new maritime policy, is that we will have not necessarily join the JEF, the Joint Expeditionary Force, which is a maritime neighbourhood watch for the North Atlantic that is led by the UK, and it's comprised of the Baltic and Nordic nations and indeed the Netherlands. Now, that has been in existence for a number of years. It's not a NATO entity. And in fact, when it was conceived, Sweden and Finland joined it. It was configured so that nations, like-minded nations could come together to help each other, to share the patrolling and to share intelligence. Canada was involved with it last year, and they created a concept called the Jeff +1. So it meant that Canada wasn't in the regional area, but the other members were happy to have it cooperate. And they're using that mechanism to allow Ireland, despite our squeamishness, to be able to be involved and to contribute to it and to, more importantly, benefit from it. So those are steps in the right direction if we pursue them fully and we don't let politics get in the way. I don't think we will. I think the EU presidency is going to further concentrate minds, both at political level and at ordinary citizen level, about the fact that if we don't want to join NATO, that's fine, but nobody's even looking for us to do it. But we do need to find ways to cooperate. We have things to protect. We have partners and allies that rely on us to mine stuff that's relevant to them, such as the cables. So we need to start leveraging that.
Declan Power, I suspect you will have exercised some of our listeners, but thank you very much for sharing your time and expertise with us here on Let's Go Green. We'll be back after the break.
Let's Go Green, sponsored by EirGrid, managing and operating Ireland's electricity grid for a cleaner energy future. Check out airgrid.ie for more.
Listening to Let's Go Green here on Midlands 103, and I'm delighted to be joined once again by Niall Hatch of BirdWatch Ireland. Niall, welcome back to the programme.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be back.
Now, Niall, this feeding of the birds can be, well, let's just say controversial, because, you know, when I was small, you could go to maybe a pond or a lake and throw a bit of bread in, and that was kind of a fun activity to do as a child. We now know better, and we now know that that's not the right thing to do. But also we have to think of, well, diseases and being really careful in what we're doing. So talk to me about this latest guidance that has been issued to anybody who might be feeding birds in their gardens in particular.
Yes, and we know that a great number of people all across Ireland do feed birds in their garden. I'm one of them, and I love it. And up until now, BirdWatch Ireland's advice has always been that although feeding them during the coldest months of the winter is the most important time to feed them, when they need the most help and when they tend to rely on that food more. We always used to say that feeding them during the summer months was no problem. However, based on recent scientific advice and sort of changes in bird populations, for the time being at least, we're advising that people actually shouldn't feed the birds between the months of May and October. So people that are feeding birds at the moment, we'd urge them please to stop and not resume until November. And the reason for that change in advice is because of a change in circumstances. There's been a very nasty disease rearing its head in the last couple of years, particularly called trichomoniasis. Now, we've been tracking this in the last few years, but recently it's become quite an issue. It's a disease that affects finches particularly. I must stress that it's no harm to humans whatsoever. We cannot contract this. It's nothing to do with bird flu or hantavirus or any of these things. It's a bird disease that humans cannot catch, and indeed all mammals are immune from it. So cats, dogs, sheep, goat, rabbits, guinea pigs.
So it's very specific to birds, and we don't...
Very specific to birds. So there's no human health concern here whatsoever, and it's not connected with bird flu. That's a different thing. But it is particularly bad for certain species of birds. Some have mostly immunity. Birds like blackbirds and other thrushes, robins, blue tits, they seem to be more or less fine. But finches are very badly hit by it. Also sparrows and pigeons, but particularly a bird called the greenfinch. And our studies have shown over the last few years that the numbers of greenfinches in Ireland have fallen by about 50% over the course of the last 10 years.
Oh, wow. Really, that's a big decline.
It's a big decline for a species that was formerly pretty common and a regular garden visitor. Also, we're starting to see a similar sort of decline starting, not quite a stark, but it's starting with the chaffinch, which is one of Ireland's most common birds. And then also other finch species like the goldfinch and the linnet. And one of the common denominators there is contamination through garden feeders. And that's by no means the only means of transmission of this disease, but it is a problem. It's a disease that's carried in the saliva of the birds. And when bird food and bird feeders become infected with it, it can persist for quite a while. It spreads very virulently. It's a horrible disease. There's no cure for it when the birds do have it, and most die. And what happens is it causes swellings in their throats that eventually get so severe that the poor bird can no longer swallow, and they starve to death. And so it's a very cruel, drawn-out death, and very heartbreaking to see. And people do see it. That's one of the things we've been doing with our Irish Garden Bird Survey in recent years. Those who take part may have noticed a few years ago we added a section there about, did you spot any sick or lethargic birds in the garden? That's often a sign of this spread of this disease. And the birds, particularly the finches, they tend to become quite sleepy looking or almost dopey in the garden. They don't respond so quickly to threats if people walk out, or a cat or something like that. They also tend to have their eyes sort of half closed. Their face looks kind of matted and even wet, and you might even see the swellings in the throat. And so
it sounds horrible.
It is really horrible, and it's so the situation is now with the fact that the longer summer days are here. The disease, the weather can suit the birds very well. Sort of a warm, wet summer is exactly what they want. The disease wants to thrive. We're encouraging people now, until further notice, to not feed the birds from May through to October, because it's doing more harm than good. And the fact of it is, there's still plenty of natural food around. So even the birds that are coming to your garden may look like that they're feeding there in your garden a lot, but they're actually only getting a very small percentage of the daily feeding requirements from your feeders at this time of year. It's a different matter when it comes to the winter. So when it gets to November and the temperatures really drop, then the birds do rely on that more. It's still usually only a minority of their food each day in the garden, except when we have really cold weather conditions. If temperatures go below freezing and there's snow and ice, then they do rely on it a bit more. And in that case, feeding the birds does more good than harm, provided that you adhere to really strict hygiene guidelines with this. So we're urging people to make sure that with your bird feeders, when you are feeding the birds, that you clean them regularly, at least weekly, but possibly more than that, depending on how fast the food is being used. You can use a bleach solution or scrub them in soap and water. It's not enough to just rinse them under a tap or something like that, because it's a waterborne disease that won't do very much.
Okay, So let's break it down for people, because in life in general, my philosophy is control the controllables. So at the moment in the summertime, we know there's enough food for the birds out and about. So the controllable thing here is, if you've got bird feeders in the garden, take them in, give them a good clean, store them until the winter. Is that right?
Spot on. That's exactly correct.
Now, I'm thinking of... And I'm thinking in particular, there's one that I actually received as a gift from a Let's Go Green interviewee team. Ooh. I had young teenagers in a couple of years ago on the show, and they were gathering pallets from around Tullamore at the time. So forgive me, girls, I've forgotten your names, but I remember one of you had a father with a truck, and they were gathering pallets from around Tullamore, and they were turning the pallets into bird feeders. So I have one on a particular tree hanging up for the birds. Like, I'm thinking, you've got bird feeders that maybe are the more commercial ones that are like plastic, and I'm thinking in this instance are possibly easier to clean.
Yes.
Then you've got the other ones that are more environmentally friendly, like they're recycled wood or they're wooden. So, like, what do we need to do to clean them? And to, like you say, running them under a tap of water is not going to do it good enough in this instance.
No, absolutely. And there are many different types of feeders that people use. There's so many different ones on the market. And you're right, the ones that are plastic and stainless steel tend to be the easier ones to clean. For those, I would recommend submerging them in a bleach solution, something like Milton or something like that, something that would sterilize them. That would be enough. And then obviously rinse that solution off and allow them to air dry, and that will do it. For wooden feeders, depending on how the wood has been treated, it actually can work very well. It works well for nest boxes too. This disease isn't a threat for nest boxes, but it's always good to clean those out too. Boiling water works quite well with those more organic materials. Obviously, with plastic, you run the risk of melting it. And with pure metal, that will work too. But a kettle full of boiling water poured over the wood, that will kill this. So that will work, and you can let that air dry.
But of
obviously,
course,
it depends how the wood's treated and how it's been packed. But just for pure wood, that will work quite well.
It's an awful shame, because a lot of people take a great deal of enjoyment out of watching the birds come into the garden and eating from the feeders, and particularly children, they really get a kick out of it.
Yes, that's it. And the bottom line really is, we know that the reason that people like to feed birds in their garden, the main reason at least, is that they want to help those birds. They want to give them a boost. They want to try and sort of help to redress some of the balance, and especially the way we humans have wrought havoc on so many wild habitats. Well, we should give a bit back and try to help these birds. And that's the reason why I feed birds in my garden myself. But it's also the reason why I have currently stopped as at the start of May, because I realized that if my motivation is to help the birds, I want to do what's best for them, not necessarily what's best for me. And so, yeah, I'm sad not to be seeing the birds coming to my feeders in the garden. However, I have found ways to compensate for that. And this is what we're saying. There's many other ways you can help birds in gardens. One of the best ways of all is to plant native plants that support the native insects and also provide the native berries and seeds that these birds have co-evolved with. And that works extremely well. And I think for children who enjoy seeing birds up close, actually there can be more of a learning or more connection with nature when they realize that that plant that I planted last year, it's now providing seed, like a teasel, for example, providing seed for the goldfinches, and they see that natural connection. Or they see the patch of the garden that you've let go a bit wild, you've tolerated the snails in there, and then the song thrushes are coming in and feeding on those snails. And actually that's a more natural form of helping the birds, I think, because that works very well. And you're also helping a wider range of species, because it is only a subset of our garden birds that actually will visit feeders. So the birds like the dunnock and the wren, very common birds, but they almost never go to feeders, occasionally, but very rarely. Birds like the willow warbler, I was chatting to one of my colleagues about this morning, the willow warbler, a migrant from Africa, one of Ireland's most common birds. There are millions of them in Ireland at the moment, yet it's a bird that the general public are completely unaware of. And one of the main reasons for that is that it might be in your garden, but it's up in the trees feeding on the caterpillars. It won't go next nigh or near a feeder. It doesn't know what one is. But if you have native plants in the garden that are supporting those native butterfly and moth caterpillars, then the willow warblers are thriving. And that's really important. I think as well, when people are looking at helping birds, if that's the main motivation, I think we need to recognize that most of the bird species which visit our gardens are actually the ones that tend to be doing the best from a conservation point of view nationwide, with a couple of exceptions, the greenfinch being one, which I mentioned, which now is a cause for concern because its population has dropped so much. But by and large, the birds you're seeing in your gardens, the robins, the blackbirds, the thrushes, the wrens, the blue tits, the great tits, these kind of birds, they are very common. They're some of the few species that aren't in trouble in Ireland. And the reason they are garden birds in the first place is because they're the birds that are best able to tolerate us and what we have changed in the environment. They can thrive close to humans in our spaces, in our gardens and parks. There's far more birds across Ireland that can't survive in gardens, and they often get forgotten about. So we're looking at a lot of our farmland birds, our breeding waders, which are in dire trouble, so many of our seabirds, for which Ireland is internationally important. And our message to people as well is if you want, if your motivation is to help birds, by all means, at the right time of year, feed them in the garden. That helps a lot. But also, please join BirdWatch Ireland and also get involved in local conservation projects. And when you're out in the countryside, take part in surveys, avoid disturbance of birds on beaches and at seabird colonies. That's really important because we have a situation now where a shocking 63% of Ireland's bird species are at risk of extinction, and very few of those on that list are garden birds. So it's more the birds that get forgotten about in the wider countryside. And then also going back to the plant situation, if you think of birds that you might not necessarily associate with your garden, maybe birds like swallows and swifts. Some people do have those in their gardens, but many people don't. But if you have native plants, they're providing native insects that then go up into the sky, and they're food for these birds. They may eat them several kilometers away, but the fact is that
you're
that
still
actually
supporting them.
Yeah, and if every garden in Ireland, and there's over 1.5 million private gardens across our country, if every garden had 2 or 3 native plant species in it, the benefit that would have for insects and for pollinators, and therefore for the birds and for all sorts of other creatures, would be almost incalculable. It'd be massive. And I think that there's been a lot of a shift we're seeing in gardening. It often used to be the case that gardening was seen as a battle against nature, getting rid of those horrible weeds. A weed is just a native plant that's in the wrong place or somewhere it isn't
we have decided it's in the wrong place.
Exactly.
And I know in my own family, I have a particular visitor to my own home who looks at my front lawn and goes, it's a bit untidy. And I'm like, well, no more me. Well, Niall Hatch, thank you so much for bringing us up to date on all of that. So I think the advice is very clear. For now, at least, summer months, just leave the bird feeders alone, bring them in, give them a good clean, and wait until winter time. Niall, if listeners want to find out more about what we've been talking about, where's the best place to go?
So we have an information page about this specifically on our website. If you go to birdwatchireland.ie and go to the Ireland's Birds section, click in there, you'll see front and center all sorts of information about garden birds. And hopefully, maybe next year, maybe the year after, I don't know, maybe you and I will be having another conversation where we're saying this disease has gone. It's okay to feed the birds again in the summer, but I can't prejudge that. So I don't know how long this advice will be in place for. So for the time being, we just urge people to please to follow it and to put the birds first.
Well, Niall Hatch of BirdWatch Ireland, as always, thank you very much for joining us on Let's Go Green. We will be back after the break.
Let's Go Green, sponsored by EirGrid, managing and operating Ireland's electricity grid for a cleaner energy future. Check out airgrid.ie for more.
You're listening to Let's Go Green here on Midlands 103. I hope you enjoyed the show this week. Thanks once again to Zoe Ryan for stepping in when I had to take a couple of days leave. I hope that you enjoyed our conversations this evening. It was really interesting to speak with Professor John Sweeney around nuclear power and, well, the fact that it's not really all that practical, regardless of concerns that people might have around us, but just that the tech isn't there just yet, and that really what we've heard over recent weeks is mere kite flying on behalf of, activists who may have interests, or, people just pulling at strings trying to find a solution to the desperate situation that we do find ourselves in. And unfortunately, that situation means that many, many of us are finding it very hard to pay for electricity, heat our homes and all of that. And the just transition, while it is still underway, has, I think it's fair to say, yet to feel just for many people. But as Professor Sweeney says, we must continue, we must build on our renewable sources and, like my conversation with Declan Power, become more secure in our energy resources here in this country so that they are, more sustainable, yes, in how they're created, but also so that we all have a more secure access to them. So there is hope from what Declan and John were saying a little bit earlier on. Now, just a reminder from that conversation that I had with Niall Hatch of BirdWatch Ireland, just in case you did miss it, it is important. Our bird population is under significant risk this summer due to a virus, which I'm not even going to pretend I know how to pronounce. But what we've been asked to do this summer is not to feed the birds. That's it, not feed birds this summer, because this virus is being transmitted through our garden bird feeders. And we're all being asked to take, if you have any kind of garden bird feeder, to take it inside or into the garage, whatever it might be, but take it away from the birds, give it a good sterilisation and put it away until the winter months when, in fact, it may be needed. I did say at the end of the piece that my piece with Declan Power may have exercised some Let's Go Green listeners. So if you have been exercised by any of the conversations today, or indeed you just want us to mention something that's happening in your community, and perhaps it's something positive and you want to celebrate some climate action in your community, please do feel free to get in contact with us here on the show. You can email me directly, hello@thecommunicationscoach.ie. Now, a very special man celebrated quite a roundy birthday in the last couple of days. So as we wrap up this evening's show, and thank you and the contributors as always for staying tuned to Let's Go Green, I'll leave you now with Sir David Attenborough. Have a great week.
Is this how our story is due to end? A tale of the smartest species doomed by that all-too-human characteristic of failing to see the bigger picture in pursuit of short-term goals. We are, after all, the greatest problem solvers to have ever existed on Earth. We will all share in the benefits: affordable clean energy, healthy air, and enough food to sustain us all. Nature is a key ally. We're going to have to learn together how to achieve this, ensuring none are left behind. We must use this opportunity to create a more equal world. And our motivation should not be fear, but hope. If working apart, we are force powerful enough to destabilize our planet, surely working together, we are powerful enough to save it.
Let's Go Green, sponsored by EirGrid, managing and operating Ireland's electricity grid for a cleaner energy future. Check out airgrid.ie for more.